Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're all well. Motec, 266,000 subscribers. I just come across this the other day, to be honest. It's just something to do with Cumbria. Like, that was why I'm mentioning it, really. It was, I started watching it. I had no idea it was to do with Cumbria. In fact, the actual site that it is mentioned is probably about literally less than 2 mile from where I'm currently sat. So I just started watching it, but then it come out it was to do with St. Bees, which I've been to a few times in a few videos. So I just thought I'd give it a mention, to be honest. Bit of history here. I wasn't even aware of, to be honest. I wasn't aware of till I watched this documentary or this video on Motec here. There's the police going past. Something else bad has happened in Britain. Would you believe it? Would you believe it there? So yeah, so St. Bees, archaeologists found a medieval knight well preserved after 600 years. This is impossible. So literally, this happened literally 2 minutes down the road from me. Didn't know about it at all till I watched this. Um, just found it interesting, to be honest. Again, bit of Cumbrian crack, so to speak. These the thing. Anyone from Cumbria as well might not know. I've heard of this. I just thought again, just thought it was interesting. St. Bees and 600-year-old medieval knight, well preserved. So let's play a bit of this.
In the summer of 1981, archaeologists were digging at the ruins of St.
Although I was only one in 1981, so that could be a lot bit to do with why I'd never heard of this.
Bees Priory in Cumbria. At first, it was just another dig, sorting through old stones, noting burials, and piecing together bits of medieval life. But when they opened a coffin sealed in lead, they found something completely unexpected. Inside wasn't the dry bones they anticipated, but a man who looked as if he had only recently died. His skin was soft, his hair and beard still on his face, and even his organs were preserved. So what was really happening here? How did a body nearly 600 years old manage to stay preserved? The unknown. By the late 20th century, researchers were studying the priory's remains and the burials beneath it to learn more about medieval life and death.
So this is St. Bees Priory. I've tried to go there once, but it was locked. So I'll try again at some point. I'll go to St. Bees and have a lot of wander. It might be next year now, but the weather's turning to shit here. Although I still maybe do some lot of walk videos. I maybe go down Whitehaven again. I think the docks. Last time I was down, the docks had all gone to bagwash, and the entire dock had gone have now gone brown instead of just that one area. They've absolutely ruined it, and it's worse than it ever was last time I was down there. So we maybe need a bagwash dock update. The shittiest docks in all the world are worse than they ever were. So this is St. Bees Priory. Again, I have tried to go here, but it's next to St. Bees School. Oh, this is St. Bees Church anyway. The Priory maybe isn't still here. It's maybe like he was saying the ruins of the Priory there. Not really true, sure, to be honest. But anyhow, I have tried to go to this building, but it was locked, so I didn't get to see it. But I do like to go in the churches, you know, and have a look at the architecture and be some beautiful churches and cathedrals, and it's always worth a look in at, again, at the architecture and everything. We don't build them like we used to, is the saying. So the crack is medieval knight, 600 years preserved. They've opened up. He was lined in lead, which shows a sign of somebody of fairly good stature of the time to be lined in lead. And yeah, there was a medieval knight who didn't even die in England. He died abroad on the Crusades, I think. So I'll play a bit more. Very interesting.
What they did not expect was that under the church floor, they would uncover one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds in Britain. The team was particularly focused on the chancel, the space near the high altar, because that's where the wealthiest or most important individuals were often buried. In medieval times, being laid to rest closer to the altar was seen as a privilege reserved for high-status figures, a way of securing proximity to God, even in death. As they worked their way through the stones, the archaeologists came upon a large coffin that instantly stood out. Unlike the simple wooden boxes or hastily dug earth burials that were common, this one was heavy, carefully sealed, and made entirely of lead. A lead coffin in itself wasn't unheard of, but the effort and expense required to produce one suggested that whoever rested inside was no ordinary person. Lead had to be mined, smelted, transported, and worked into sheets sturdy enough to form a protective shell. Then the seams had to be soldered or hammered shut. This was not something done for commoners. It was reserved for the elite, the wealthy, or those with powerful connections to the church. That meant before the coffin was even opened, there were strong hints that the body inside belonged to someone significant, perhaps a knight or cleric of high rank. When the lid was finally pried open, it left them stunned. Inside was a man whose body appeared astonishingly intact, despite being buried for over 600 years. His skin still covered his limbs, yellowed and shrunken but recognisably human. His fingernails and toenails were clearly visible. Hair clung to his scalp. When they inspected his torso, they found internal organs still preserved, something virtually unheard of in medieval burials. It was as if time had stopped at the moment of death. The discovery forced the team to stop and change course. Normally, when archaeologists uncover human remains, it's pretty straightforward. Take notes, measure the bones, collect samples. But this wasn't just a skeleton. This was a whole body, with skin and organs still preserved after centuries. That meant slowing down, bringing in special precautions, and handling everything with extra care. The body was carefully moved so experts could perform an autopsy, and this wasn't like the usual work done on ancient remains. Normally, all you've got are bones. But here, they were looking at preserved tissue, real organs, even the man's last meal. It suddenly felt less like archaeology, and more like modern pathology. For once, they could ask questions that went beyond age or cause of death. Things like what kind of health he had, what he ate, even what diseases he might have carried. It was like the past wasn't so distant after all. The small details mattered too. Pieces of clothing showed what he'd been buried in. Objects in the coffin gave clues about his identity. Samples of hair, nails, and tissue were taken for tests that could reveal his diet, his health, and even where he grew up. Now the question remains, who exactly was this man? His burial in the Priory's chancel, the use of an expensive lead coffin, and the extraordinary preservation all suggested someone of prominence. Everything about the body screamed high status. All the signs of wealth and position weren't random. They belonged to someone history had recorded, and they were about to find out. When the sealed coffin at St. Bees was finally examined in detail, the mystery man inside was eventually identified as Anthony de Lucy, the third Baron Lucy of Cockermouth. His name might not ring out like Richard the Lionheart or Edward the Black Prince, but in his own time, Anthony was part of one of the most powerful families in northern England, a dynasty whose roots stretched deep into the unstable borderlands of Cumbria. The Lucy family's history was written in stone and steel. From their seat at Cockermouth Castle, they controlled large stretches of land across Cumberland and Westmoreland, regions.
So, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, so obviously Cockermouth as well. I've been there in multiple videos. I've been to Cockermouth, and St. Bees and Priory was sort of, again, this is a time before cars and quite a large area. I've also been to Calder Bridge, Priory there as well, and there was like sort of medieval routes that everybody took across the fells and walking paths that sort of still are used today. So again, it's just again not so much that relevant to anybody not from Cumbria really, but just very interesting to me and anybody from Cumbria maybe. And again, it was 1981, so you know, unless you're quite old, you probably won't remember this, and maybe even then you didn't know because well, was things publicised in such ways back then as well. So I just found it very interesting, and again, back in the day, Cumbria obviously being the last county before Scotland, there was big battles between the Scotch and the English fought over much Cumbrian soil and Carlisle and everything as well. So it was a heavily defended area. Again, I think he goes on to say that in a minute. They're seeing a lot of action basically, and he will have been well again to hold the fort, so to speak, against the Scottish. Wasn't an easy task, so he was probably well favoured in the lands by the people and by possibly even royalty for, again, being one of the families who was in charge of trying to sort of keep the land. You know what I mean? Keep the invading Scots away, which again was not an easy task. So the Romans eventually built a wall, Hadrian's Wall, because they couldn't be bothered with the job. To be honest, it was too much effort. Them just build a wall, build a wall. So yeah, I'll play a bit more.
That were continuously caught between the rival claims of England and Scotland. The Lucys had risen to prominence by defending this northern edge of England, and by the 14th century, they had secured a place among the great baronial families. Their family crest showed 3 interlocked fish, called Lucys or pike, and anyone in the region would have recognised it right away. Anthony was born in 1332, right into the family's legacy. With the title came money, but also big responsibilities. As the 3rd Baron Lucy, he had to look after his estates, keep order on his lands, and most importantly, fight for the king when called. The king at the time was Edward III, who was set on pushing England's claim to the French throne. So for Anthony, life meant splitting his time between battles overseas and guarding the border with Scotland. From what records we have, he seems to have been a loyal and reliable servant to the crown. Anthony's job wasn't just sitting around running his estates. A big part of it was grabbing men from the north whenever Scotland acted up, which happened a lot. The raids could be nasty. The Scots, especially back when Robert the Bruce was around, knew exactly when England was distracted and would swoop down, torch villages, and drive off the cattle. For lords like Anthony, holding the line wasn't some noble choice. It was flat-out survival, for their tenants and for themselves. Being a marcher lord meant
very different times. Again, when I first watched this the other day, I was just sort of thinking back, like thinking to these times and what he was saying there, and sort of living in Cumbria in these times where it was all about survival. And again, all this modern bullshit we're lost in today. It wasn't like, again, people not knowing what sex they are. There was no time back then to be wondering what sex you are here. The fucking Scotch are coming down and they're gonna fucking rape and pillage every single fucking thing in one of us if we don't fucking fight them off here, you know what I mean? This is the times, like, it's rough days. I mean, I've thought of making a video called History was fucking awful, to be honest. Like, most of history is just a fucking bloodbath, and like you'd be lucky to fucking survive. You know what I mean? Till like old age. To be honest, most of history, if you made it to old age, you fucking absolutely lucked out. Except till like maybe the last 100 years. After the Second World War. You know what I mean? In Britain anyway. In Britain. So yeah. Anyway, I just again like thinking back to these times and. I watched a few videos lately about like how do people keep warm in castles and what was it like in castles in medieval times and when it was freezing and there's no windows and things like that, and just again, lucky the times we live in many ways. Lucky the times we live in. So I'll play a bit more anyway, and it's very interesting. Again, if you're from Cumbria and again the times we live in compared to what it used to be like. For quite some time, keeping the Scotch off, fending the Scotch off.
Living on edge, ready to fight at a moment's notice, while still trying to keep the books balanced back home. But his service didn't stop in Britain. Like many nobles of his rank, he was pulled into the larger stage of European conflicts. In the 14th century, English knights often joined campaigns abroad, partly out of religious duty, partly for honour, and partly for the chance to make connections. Anthony followed that path too. His most famous journey was to Prussia, where the Teutonic Knights still carried on crusades against the pagan Lithuanians. For men like Anthony, it was a way to earn the same kind of glory that earlier crusaders had won in the Holy Land. Anthony left England for one of these campaigns in the late 1360s. What happened after is hazy. What we do know is that he died in 1368, far from the castles of Cumbria and the royal court he had served. Whether it was battle wounds, disease, or simple bad luck, we can't be sure. But what we do know is that his family brought his body home. In that era, most knights who died abroad were buried where they fell. Moving a body across Europe was costly, complicated, and risky. Yet Anthony's relatives had him recovered, placed in a lead coffin, and carried all the way back to England. That effort says everything about how important he was to his family and their need to protect his legacy. They wanted him buried among his ancestors, remembered as a man of honour, not left behind in foreign soil. Anthony de Lucy travelled east as part of one of these campaigns in the late 1360s. Records are sparse, but what is clear is that he never returned home alive. He died abroad in 1368, far from the windswept castles of Cumbria or the halls of Edward III's court. The exact cause of his death remains uncertain, whether from wounds sustained in battle, from illness, or from some other misfortune. What is certain is that his death triggered a remarkable effort to ensure he was not left in foreign soil. His body was transported back across Europe, through dangerous and expensive logistics, all the way to England. That decision alone tells us much about his status and his family's devotion. In the medieval world, transporting a body over long distances was rare and often avoided because of the difficulty of preservation. Most knights who died on campaign were buried where they fell. For Antony's relatives to go to the effort of recovering him, shipping his remains across thousands of miles, and entombing him in a specially constructed lead coffin indicates the importance they placed on his burial. The choice of St. Bees Priory as his final resting place was no accident either. The Lucy family had long-standing ties to the priory, which had been founded in the Norman era and remained one of the most significant religious houses in Cumberland. It was a Benedictine community dedicated to prayer and service, and like many such institutions, it was supported by the patronage of local lords. For a family like the Lucys, the priory was both a spiritual ally and a symbol of their power. By placing Anthony's body in the chancel, close to the altar, the family ensured not only that he was honoured in death, but also that prayers would continually be said for his soul. Medieval belief held that the living could help the dead reach heaven faster through masses, and proximity to holy places was thought to magnify that effect. A knight who had died far from home, fighting for Christendom in a foreign crusade, being laid to rest in sacred ground at St. Bees, tied together his worldly duty and his eternal hope.
Yeah, fighting for Christendom. So we're there again in many ways. We're there again. The fight for Christendom's on with the Muslim takeover of Britain and the world in many ways. Ireland seems to be having a bit of trouble with them, I've seen as well. So very interesting. I found again 600-year-old medieval knight died abroad on some kind of crusade, not the actual crusades. Was that important, was brought back and lead coffined, and again you got to remember the times, and like he mentioned before, making a lead coffin in them times of such size, and again so well to preserve him will have been no easy feat. So shows how important this man was of the time. And again, well, being Cumbrian in many ways and being born here, but I don't think my family was in this area at the time, or the more northern, originally from Ulverston, I think. And then I don't know where before then, but yeah, a lot of like people of Cumbria would think it would be Scottish if it wasn't for these families, so to speak, that fended off the Scots when they invaded, and there was probably plenty more of these families, sort of noble families. So yeah, he was an honoured man in many ways, and again fighting abroad for the king, and again that was your duty at the time. If you were one of the sort of noble families, your duty was to the king, and if you had to go abroad and fight the wars and the crusades, there was no option really. You had to do it. So very different times as well. Like again, you've got to be thankful in many ways for the times we live in, and some of the home comforts and everything that we've got today, to be honest, because again, history was a shit show, to be honest. History was an absolute shit show of bloodbaths. So we've done well so far. If you're listening to this and you haven't been murdered in a bloodbath, you've done well in all of history, to be honest. You've topped out. You're probably in the top 5% of all people in history that you didn't get murdered in a bloodbath. So, well, yet. There is time, obviously, there is time to all be murdered in a bloodbath. So we'll hope that doesn't happen, but we're doing alright. If you're listening to this, you're doing alright. We haven't gone yet.
That should have been the end of it. A noble burial, prayers for the soul, the story closed. But it wasn't. Scientists finally began the full forensic examination of the St. Bees man. What they uncovered was unlike anything they had ever encountered in a medieval burial. Instead of a skeleton or dry, brittle remains, the body still carried the unmistakable features of a living man, features that had somehow been preserved for 6 centuries. The most striking detail was his torso. His chest looked strangely puffed up, as if the body had once swelled from within. Instead of collapsing into itself as centuries passed, his body had been locked in this inflated state, a kind of suspended decay. His skin, though discoloured, still clung to the body in sheets, making the figure appear eerily lifelike compared to the empty skeletons that usually filled medieval graves. And then there was his face. You could still make out faint stubble, a reddish beard clinging to his jaw, which made him feel weirdly close, like a guy who'd only been in the ground a few months, not 600 years. His skin had pulled tight and shriveled, sure, but the shape of his face was still right there. For scientists used to dealing with bare skulls and random bones, actually seeing hair, beard and skin made the whole thing feel very weird. Furthermore, the fingernails and toenails were preserved almost perfectly, clear enough that individual ridges could still be seen. The hands in particular made the corpse seem strangely modern. You could look at the curled fingers, with their intact nails, and forget for a moment that the man had been buried in the 14th century. These details alone would have made the St. Bees body exceptional. But what set it apart were the injuries, visible once forensic specialists began the autopsy. Careful examination revealed multiple broken ribs on one side of the chest. These fractures weren't the kind of clean breaks you might associate with old age or mishandling during excavation. They were sharp, violent and consistent with heavy blows delivered while the man was alive. The ribs had been shattered inward, puncturing and collapsing the lungs. Inside the chest cavity, traces of blood suggested massive internal hemorrhaging at the time of death. The pathologist concluded that he had suffered repeated, crushing trauma, injuries severe enough to cause rapid suffocation and eventual death. This picture strongly suggested violence, the kind one would expect on a battlefield. The collapse of the lungs and the bleeding pointed to forceful strikes, perhaps from a mace or the blunt edge of a polearm, weapons commonly used in 14th century warfare. Unlike cuts from swords, which leave sharp bone edges, blunt trauma produced exactly the kind of rib damage seen here. Whatever the precise weapon, the conclusion was inescapable. The man had not died peacefully. He had been struck down, his body sustaining terrible injuries in combat or in some other violent confrontation. The presence of intact internal organs added further weight to this interpretation. In most medieval burials, soft tissues are long gone, leaving only skeletal traces that tell partial stories. But here, pathologists could see evidence of lungs collapsed by trauma, of bleeding into the chest cavity, and even the enlarged state of other organs that hinted at the body's physical response in its final moments. Forensic scientists could read the story of his death in far greater detail than any other medieval body they had ever examined. Alongside the physical injuries, there were clues in his clothing, or rather, what remained of it. Fragments of a linen shroud were found wrapped around the body, suggesting that despite the violence of his death, he had been carefully prepared for burial. Linen was a common burial fabric in the 14th century, valued for its purity and association with religious rites. Even though his coffin was extraordinary, the choice of a covering connected his burial to the broader Christian tradition of the time. Still, none of that prepared anyone for what they saw next. Unlike the wooden boxes used for most burials, Anthony's was solid lead, fully encased and tightly sealed. That seal shut out oxygen, and without oxygen, the bacteria that normally eat away at a body couldn't do their work. In effect, the coffin created its own little capsule, where decay slowed to a crawl. Inside the coffin, chemistry did some of the work. Moisture mixed with fatty acids from the body, and, in places, turned into this soap-like stuff called adipotere, or grave wax. It's not pretty, but it can kind of seal things in and keep skin and organs from breaking down. Anthony's whole body didn't turn into the stuff, but there were traces of it, and that helped keep him in one piece. And then there's the ground itself. St. Bees sits on the coast, the soil damp and cool, and that kind of environment slows decay even more. Put that together with a lead coffin that was basically airtight, and you've got the perfect setup for a body to last way longer than you'd expect. But here's the thing. Not everyone buys that it was just nature doing its job. Some think Anthony might have been embalmed before he was even brought home. Medieval embalmers weren't unheard of. Royals, especially, had their bodies treated with spices, resins, or alcohol mixes to keep them from rotting, especially if they had to travel. And Anthony died in Prussia, hundreds of miles away. Getting his body all the way back to Cumbria would have taken time, and without some extra care, he never would have made it. This suggests his body might have been treated with substances like pine resin, beeswax, or oils, natural preservatives available in the 14th century. These could have been poured into body cavities or applied to wrappings, offering protection during transit. Some even speculate that the Teutonic Knights, among whom he died, might have had their own ritualized methods of preparing fallen comrades for long-distance burial. But when forensic scientists examined Anthony's remains, they found no definitive evidence of embalming agents. No resin residues, no wax traces, no unusual chemicals clinging to the tissues. The linen shroud showed no signs of saturation with oils. If such substances had been used in meaningful amounts, some residue should have survived. Instead, the body seemed untouched, lay in the coffin in a simple shroud, and was sealed away. Beyond the science, there's another side to this story: religion. In the medieval world, a body that resisted decay wasn't just unusual, it was often seen as a sign of holiness. Saints whose corpses stayed intact were believed to carry God's blessing, and people would travel miles just to see them, treating those remains as living proof of the divine. Anthony de Lucy was never declared a saint, and his family didn't make claims of miracles, but the image still carried weight. Here was a knight who had gone off to fight for Christianity in foreign lands, only to be brought home and sealed in a coffin that seemed to stop time. For people of his era, that could easily have been read as a symbol of purity or divine favour, even if no one said it out loud. Today, of course, scientists see it very differently. They don't need miracles to explain what happened. A tightly sealed lead coffin creates its own environment. No oxygen, trapped moisture, and just the right chemistry to slow decay. It's rare but not unheard of. Researchers point to other sealed burials across Europe, where bodies have been preserved in similar ways.
So, he's just going to tell you about other bodies that have been preserved in similar ways. So, that's kind of the crack, to be honest. St. Bees, obviously, very near me, been there a few times. To the beach, medieval night, St. Bees Priory, very popular. Again, St. Bees is the name of the thing. It's named after a saint. I don't know the true history of St. Bees. I'll maybe look it up one day and tell you about it when I go there one time. So yeah, St. Bees Priory, a medieval knight preserved for 600 years. Died abroad fighting in crusades of sorts for king and country. Back in the times, I just found it quite interesting. Again, it's like literally 2 miles from me, and I didn't know anything about this until I watched this documentary from Motec, I don't know where Motec is, but maybe an American is telling me about history 2 mile away. You know what I mean? The beauty of the internet, the absolute beauty of the internet. So I just thought I'd give it a mention. I'll leave it there. Peace.